Okay, hi everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Today there's still some people coming through, so we'll just kick off in a little minute. So I'm Paul McMillan, the community manager here at the Data Lab. I'm really delighted today to be joined by Moffin Njoroge. Moffin is an investigative data analyst, which is a very cool job title at Code for Africa. Today we've got a really interesting event for you around using data and AI to track and monitor disinformation in Africa. So I'm just going to pass over to Moffin now. If you have any questions for Moffin based on his presentation or about the work that he and his colleagues are doing at Code for Africa, please just pop them into the Q&A function, and Moffin will get to them at the end of the session. So with that, I think I will pass over to you, Moffin. So take it away.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, so my name is Moffin Njoroge. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm an investigative data analyst at Code for Africa, working on the iLab team, where I normally specialize with disinformation, illicit financial flows, influence operation, and CIB, coordinated inauthentic behavior, and also tracking extremism and hate speech across social media platforms across Africa. So before we start, this is the topic for today. I hope, Paul, I'm audible.
Yep, you are.
Great. Yeah, so the discussion is data, AI, and politics. So using data and AI to track and monitor disinformation in Africa. I'm going to give a brief overview of our organization, the kind of projects and research we do, and also possible areas for coordination or partnership if any of you might be interested. So, so let's get this started. We start with an introduction to Code for Africa. Code for Africa is Code for Africa is Africa's largest indigenous network of civic and technology, CSO. We have around the number listed is on 10, but should be around 150 full-time staff, including analysts, technologists, and so on and so forth in around 26 countries, with main offices in around 8 or 10 countries, mostly in South Africa, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Nigeria, and also in Senegal. And we also have a network of other groups that we work with, such as the WANA Data. So that's the women and data scientists and storytellers. So WANA Data usually works with African women working in investigative journalism, also data scientists, and also any kind of storytelling, whereby the network provides training to people on emerging and current issues in data. We also have the African Drone Network, which is a drone operators that runs the Sensors Africa. So they normally work with drones and sensors to monitor air conditions, pollution, and such. So they have had projects in Kenya and also in Nigeria. I think Abuja, one of the villages that next to the ocean called, I think, Makoko. And then we also have the fact-checking arm called the PESA Check. That also leads an initiative of the African Fact-Checking Alliance that has members in 15 African countries. And now the iLab team, that's the team that I currently work in. So it's a forensic analysis unit under the ANSIR program. So that's the African Networks of Centers for Investigative Reporting. And I'll be mentioning a few of these later on in the presentation. And we highlight how we do our work and the networks that we work in, because in the information space and the disinformation and the information disorder that we try to tackle in the continent, we can't wholly work as an individual organization. This is because of the scope and also even some of the tools that we require and the expertise. So we normally work with global networks, including institutions such as the Reuters Foundation, the Global Disinformation Index, International Fact-Checking Networks, among others, and also the Global Investigative Journalism Network. And on our approach, so this is the technologies that we usually use. So our main mandate is to help civic watchdogs, such as the media, human rights CSOs, to improve their insights and impacts using digital approaches. So we use open OSINT tools, sources and tools to monitor, collect, analyze, and archive our data. And the techniques we use are designed to give partners the actionable insight based on verifiable evidence and using replicable and transparent methodologies. So we share insights in a non-partisan and non-aligned way. So what we normally do is train media organizations, media staff in investigative techniques, data analysis, and also assist them with things like fact checking. So where we come in is not just the training, but also providing the tools that we usually use for analysis, especially now the paid up tools, the premium tools, whereby we usually get the subscriptions either from some of our donors or the donors that are sponsoring individual projects, or whereby they usually give us access as services, SAS. Kind of lost the definition for that, but I'm sure it's going to come before I end. Sorry about that. And then, these are the techniques. We have AI and NLP help us, the robots. So that's we have a team that deals with language processing and AI, forensic research, and then the data analysis, which is in the center of all that. So that going to mention how the different teams come into play. And I'm having a very terrible connection today, so I have to go off video. Yeah, and also our approach, especially in the countries that we operate in, we don't just send people to go and do analysis or just to go and talk about the information landscape in the specific country. So our teams are mostly based in countries. So this helps us with getting the nuances and the local perspectives, which might you might not be able to identify doing a general online analysis. And in one of the cases that this has been evident was especially when monitoring extremism in the Sahel region, whereby from some of the reports and when we are mapping out the groups, you kind of label some of the groups as extremist organizations when from the definition of the people now living in the areas, especially now maybe Mali and Burkina Faso, they define them as maybe resistance movements. And those kind of nuances do usually have an impact on the kind of report you are going to give to people. And also they might question of how familiar are you with the landscape that we are investigating. So in terms of intervention, we have two objectives, that is interactive and actionable. So we use data and digital content to create compelling interactives that help explain or simplify complex issues or that spark discourse. So this is whereby we give the resources after analyzing the information landscape in a specific country. We also use the data and digital content to create interactive tools that help people to personalize or localize info with paths to real world action. So this is whereby we help people or organizations such as the newsrooms to kind of localize the tools that we have for general scans or analysis or any of the tools that we have they might require, and how to localize them in their local context, depending now on the size of the newsroom and also the kind of information or reports that they are working on. And we also have the ADO, the Africa Digital Democracy Observatory. So that's a Pan-African coalition that mobilizes local nonprofit and for-profit organizations to better coordinate efforts among partners. So the links to most of these things that I'm talking about are in the each individual slides. But in case of any further information that you may require, kindly reach out at the end of this, and then I'll share the links. For ADO, it's an nonpartisan coalition of independent social justice organizations and research institutions that use cutting-edge digital analysis and also forensic research to better understand the information in integrity, and also how information manipulation can be used to subvert democracies or public discourse across Africa. So for the for ADO, it was founded by Code for Africa, CFA. It was in partnership with the Atlantic Council's DFR, the Digital Forensic Lab, DFR Lab, in 2020. So to help coordinate joint research into foreign disinformation and propaganda. Initially, it was a project and a campaign targeting 21 sub-Saharan African countries, but it has grown to 16 more. So we basically try and monitor and report on foreign interference and foreign information manipulation and interference, which we call FIMI. So some of the things that we've looked at is like Russian propaganda and disinformation campaigns in Africa, whereby it's very now has gone prevalent, especially with some of the Sahel countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, having coups being led by junta leaders, and also very active in Central Africa. We have also looked at Wagner operations in Central Africa. And so ADO also works closely with CFA-supported peer network, the African Fact-Checking Alliance. So that's why we connect over 380 independent newsrooms across Africa, normally covering, I think, around 30 countries so far. So, what Africa and ADO usually partner with these organizations, not necessarily in Africa, but also outside Africa, but working on disinformation related to the African continent to coordinate cross-border pre-banking and also other kind of investigations. And for ADO, we also, for anyone who's planning to, who's a media practitioner in Africa, we also offer micro grants and funding for technical support to small newsrooms and sometimes freelance journalists to help understand the developing information phenomena in Africa. So another aspect of CFA is the African Fact-Checking Alliance. So that's it's a self-help network for fact-checking desks in over 20 countries. So we commit to ongoing incremental skills. So we train them on debunking, verification, and fact-checking, and also now assist them with some of the in-house and also the paid tools that we have access to that normally a freelance journalist or a small CSO or maybe a small newsroom wouldn't be able to afford a subscription for. So then next we're going to look at the ecosystem strategy. So this is how we build our networks and resilient networks through peer action. And this is how the main thing we do at the iLab, tracking disinformation or looking at the information disorder. And here we look at the three aspects of the information disorder. So there is the factuality of the information. Is it false? Is it true? And then is there intent to harm? So we see that disinformation falls inside these two. Is it a Venn diagram? Yeah, sorry. I think I might be a bit anxious. Words keep escaping my mind. But yeah, you see, it falls in the middle of this diagram. So there's usually a false aspect. There's probably imposter content and a few others. And on this, we normally have 7 types of disinformation. So we have satire or comedy or parody, sorry. And then we have misleading content. So the misleading information is to frame an individual or an issue or a currently ongoing event. And then we have imposter content. That's where the genuine sources are impersonated. And the next one, you have fabricated content. Yeah, so these are content that are designed to deceive or do harm. And then we have a false connection, whereby normally in articles or whereby a headlines or the visuals or a caption to an image doesn't really match the content that that's being posted. And then we have a false context. That's where the genuine content is shared with false contextual information. And the last one is manipulated content. So that's where we look at in terms of videos, images, including the AI generated images. And when we look at the information disorder, it has the potential to polarize public opinion. It could promote violent extremism and hate speech. And also in many cases, especially now in Africa, considering the political landscape and most of the elections, there's a very big aspect of ethnic or tribal conflict and inciting against minority communities or targeting of specific communities. And when we're looking at this, we also see that the main drivers for the information disorder could include poor journalism, that not really getting your facts right, and also proper research. Then there's political influence, and there could also be a financial gain to the perpetrators or the actors trying to drive this information disorder. So this is our four-pronged approach to combating information manipulation. So we debunk claims, expose networks, and follow the money investigation and monitor narratives. So we don't, for this four-pronged approach, we normally work collaboratively with other departments in CFA. So for example, for debunking claims, it's mostly led by the PesaCheck team, which is the fact-checking arm, and for exposing networks and most of the forensic and investigative analysis, that's handled by the iLab. We also do follow the money investigations, whereby we track the movement of IFFs. So this also can be applied in a political or electoral aspect, whereby we support newsrooms, whereby trying to unearth maybe corruption by government officials or aspirants in elections. And then for monitoring narratives, you have the civic signal, which I'm going to mention, that collates and has a database of all the major mainstream media outlets in Africa. So for debunking misinformation, that's why we look at the PesaCheck. That's our fact-checking arm. So PesaCheck CFA includes the largest fact-checking initiative. That's PesaCheck with over that's I think right now they have over 25 fact-checkers, and we have fact-checkers in different countries in Africa. This mostly helps with getting the local perspective and especially understanding, since most of the native African languages aren't recognized or haven't been by AI or language model systems. So having a local person in a region or a country helps us unearthing the hidden meaning of specific terms that may be used as hate speech or incitement. And also, for example, and this is normally happens in West Africa, whereby as much as it's mostly a francophone zone, you find that the dominant language in a place like Mali is Bambara. So Bambara is one of, it's not really, even if you try and Google Translate, it's not really accurate. So having a local person working from the country or in the region helps us is the accuracy of the reporting. So PesaCheck publishes in two major international languages, that's in English and French. And it also has other 4 African languages, Afan, Oromo, and Amharic, and Tigrinya. Those are languages common in mostly Ethiopia, Djibouti, and Eritrea, and also now Swahili, the larger Eastern African countries. So they're also looking at expanding to some of the southern regions, places like Mozambique and Angola, whereby there is a higher population speaking Portuguese. So I think they usually call them Lusophone. I'm not sure if that's the correct term. Yeah, because normally it's Francophone and Anglophone, and yeah, probably Lusophone. I'm not sure of the specific term. So yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. And then we come to mapping networks. So this is one of the things that the iLab team, the investigative lab, the iLab team does. So here we normally look at who are the puppet masters behind the misleading or divisive content. So we want to look at the actors, not just now the people who are amplifying a narrative or an agenda, propaganda and such, but we have to see, we want to look, is there a network behind this? And what kind of techniques are they using to amplify a certain thing? And also now mapping networks and actors. There's also a big difference, especially now when we're looking at the extremist point of view. So in some of the countries, you'll find that as much as you're not monitoring the political landscape or the or in an electoral period, you'll find that extremism is one of the issues in a country. And now we were trying to kind of look at the actors trying to spread or recruit even people to extremist organization. It's usually the opposite of trying to understand amplification, since for people amplifying a narrative, they want it to go out there as fast as possible. But when monitoring something like extremism, they want to reach have a higher reach, but also be very subtle, so that the platforms themselves don't identify these actors. And then when we come to decoding narratives, so this is about civic signal. Civic Signal uses machine learning and NLP tools that were developed by MIT to detect how the meta narrative is evolving or being subverted. The Civic Signal normally maps out media sources in Africa, and they continue increasing the number of sources that we are mapping into a database. So it has mapped over 3,200 media sources and monitoring 2,200 in real time. So the database contains over 12 million articles. So it also gives us a historical maybe perspective of if a narrative or a campaign that we're looking at, do we have other mentions of this, or does this stem from something that happened a few years back, or does this thing happen during an election cycle? Yeah, so it gives us a starting point. So Civic Signal also drives our analysis for the GDI, Global Disinformation Index, Double Think Club, and Reuters Institute partnership. So in the Reuters Institute, I think that's where they have a market overview report, which I'm going to mention somewhere in this presentation. And then for the landscape analysis, so also this is done by Civic Signal. So to track trends or map networks that need to understand networks, you need to understand the ecosystem. So there is poor data on media ecosystem in most African countries, because, for example, when we are now reporting to a donor or an institution that has asked us to give them the information landscape, sometimes we find it hard to find the number of mainstream media stations or maybe local radio channels that are active at a specific location. And sometimes, especially most of these government institutions don't provide up-to-date data. So it can be a bit hard trying to identify these sources. So we also map journalist, editor association, and media industry bodies. So that includes groups of journalists or investigative bodies, and also like what's the word for these bodies that, for example, in Kenya, we have the Kenya Union of Journalists, or the Media Council, that now works on the laws of Kenya and journalists and how to protect them. So we work with such organizations to try and also reach out to maybe aspiring journalism or investigators or analysts now who may want to join this field. So the GDI. So we have partnered with the GDI to systematically analyze the structural reasons why toxic content takes roots in the media. By identifying specific mechanisms or weaknesses in production system or revenue models. So this helps us to fix systematic problems and give the ad industry a framework to avoid funding renegades. And especially now, this is something that we are also trying to have an analysis on in Kenya. The reason maybe I keep pointing out about Kenya and maybe in South Africa is because I'm based in Kenya, so I'm more familiar with the information landscape here. So now there has been a number of retrenchments happening and some closing down of media houses, mainstream media houses in Kenya. So we are currently carrying out a survey to kind of understand the effects of this retrenchment and how it affects the journalism as an industry in itself. And now we can provide these fundings to newsrooms across the continent and any people who might be interested in that. So in terms of the contributions for Civic Signal, Civic Signal normally contributes to the Reuters Institute Digital News Report from 2022. I think that's when we started. So it helps drive the world's leading annual survey of audience perception and newsroom trends by Oxford University. So in 3 African states, I think that's Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria. So measuring public trust in the media and tracking how the skills and resources and constraints are shaping watchdog journalism and its ability to counter influence operations. And to do this to do this analysis and investigations, we normally work on a few accepted frameworks, which are continuously evolving and also changing. And we constantly review them to make sure that they are up to date with the international standards. So one of the frameworks, the main frameworks that we use is the ABC framework. So information manipulation using disinformation, hate speech, extremism, propaganda. So we use the ABC framework to classify and analyze it and ensure that the methodology and data-driven evidence is interoperable with our global counterparts. So for the ABC, we usually look at the actor and the behavior and the content. So that was the initial one. So for the actor, we're looking at who are the people propagating this. So what kind of actors are involved. So this can help us establish whether are they state actors or are they foreign actors. State actors include now government entities or people working for government, or for foreign entities, whereby I mentioned in FIMI, foreign interference, information manipulation and interference, whereby a foreign government is trying to influence the policies or the democracy of a specific country. So we look at who the actors are and then the behavior. So what is being exhibited by the content that we are interacting with. So this helps us to establish instances or and find evidence of maybe coordination. Is there coordination or coordinated inauthentic behavior, CIB, or is there a network of people trying to push this agenda? And now the content. So what kind of content is being created? So this will help us establish, for example, whether the information being deployed is it deceptive, is it misleading and such. And for the ABC, which was the initial framework that we normally use, it has been found to be a little wanting, because since for actors, once we find for actors now we focus on the originators, so the patient zero who initiated this discussion, the conversation, then who are the amplifiers that aren't reinforcing a specific narrative, and then there's also opportunists, so they bring noise to a certain narrative. Maybe they're just hijacking a hashtag to promote their business. And also we have what we call useful idiots. So they advance the goals of the influence operation without fully realizing it. And then in terms of the behavior, so these are the tactics and the techniques that the actors are using. So also we could look, is there cross-posting? Are they using bots? Are there trolls, account amplification and such? And in terms of the content, we look at the truthfulness, the factual, how factual the information is. So is the content verifiably true or deceptive? The language, so language is also a major issue. Was it meant to be maybe focused on a specific population? And then expression. Now, this brings us the part where is the content reasonable self-expression or self-expression that may be protected now by the fundamental rights and freedom, or does it count as disinformation? And then the narratives and does the content align to known disinformation narratives? Is there any previous instances that, and then a major one is the harm. Is the content meant to be harmful? So could be hate speech and such. But we found that the ABC platform was a bit wanting and didn't cover some of the aspects. And so what we normally use now is called the ABCDE framework, whereby we added, we didn't do that. It's a universally accepted framework, sorry, whereby there's an addition to D and E. So the D is the distribution or the degree, and the E is the effect. So for the distribution, and we want to see how the reach of this content, how far has it gone, how many platforms, and from here, that's where we look at the breakout scale, which I'm going to mention, somewhere here. But in terms of now the degree and the breakout scale, we are trying to determine how many social media platform a content is spreading on. Is it viral or not? Is the spread of this content different among different platforms? Is it the same on Facebook or on X? And does it differ on TikTok? Is the content being shared by influential people, celebrities, or people with mainstream appeal and such? And also now we look, is the content likely to have an, and now we look at the last one being the effect. So the effect is the result. So is the content likely to have an outsized impact on a particular issue or target? So it could be a campaign on a specific person or a specific community. Could it possibly lead to physical harm to the target of this campaign or the narrative? Or does the content appear to undermine election integrity or democracy of a country? Or does the content appear to threaten the national security or maybe complement coercive measures? So now the DNA help us now have a full glimpse of a campaign from the originators, the actors, to the effect that it has on individual now populations or countries. So next we look at IMI, information manipulation and interference. So in this, we see how we determine IMI and its types. And it's with the ease of access present. So malicious actors can exploit the ease of access to many of these platforms that we normally use on our day-to-day lives, and use it to interfere with the information that we interact with. So in terms of the IMI, we try and equip newsroom and also other researchers and also work collaboratively to unearth these the actors that are behind these campaigns and try to explain the tactics and how not maybe to fall into the same in the future. So IMI refers to the deliberate creation and dissemination of false or misleading information, often with the intent to influence public discourse or opinion, sow discord, and also disrupt democratic processes. So it's a broad term encompassing various tactics and techniques used to manipulate the information online. And understanding these types of the techniques that are being employed by these actors is crucial to recognizing potential harm and also identifying these harms before it spreads out or breaks out to larger audiences. So in terms of the actors, the IMI actors, we look at the state actors, non-state actors, and algorithmic manipulation. So the state actors are government or state-backed organizations that use IMI to achieve political or strategic objectives. It could be government against a specific population, a group of people, an ethnic tribe. It could be also maybe an underserved minority, maybe government leading an agenda against minorities such as LGBTQ in this sense. Then we have non-state actors. Those are individual groups or organizations. They're not affiliated with the state, often motivated by ideology, financial gain, and other factors such as religion. So in terms of this, we've seen campaigns being targeted like against things like during the COVID, we had against vaccinations. Then mostly led by religious organizations. We see one led by most religious organization against the LGBTQ community. We recently reported about an agreement between some African countries from African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries with the EU, and an agreement called the Samoa Agreement. And there was a campaign in Nigeria saying that the Nigerian government signed the agreement on condition that these developing countries, now Nigeria being among them, would have to be more lax and allow more rights for LGBTQ plus people or same-sex marriages as a condition, as a precondition that they'll get the financial assistance from the EU, which was misleading because there wasn't any such aspect on that agreement. And we find that this is one of the disinformation campaign that was being led by politicians, elected senators and representatives in the House of Representatives in Nigeria. And then we go into hate speech is one of the types of disinformation. And the reason we go into hate speech is that it's one of the main leading, one of the things that lead from online discussions to physical harm, especially in the context of ethnic groups and depending on who the leaders are. So it involves using offensive language, slurs, or derogatory terms aimed at a specific group of people, often based on their race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, ethnicity, among other characteristics. So the typical hate speech involves epithets and slurs. Statement that promote malicious stereotypes or violence. It can also include nonverbal depictions and symbols. So in terms of the symbols and imagery, for example, in the Kenyan context, after I'm pretty sure maybe you've heard about the Kenyan demonstrations that were happening since mid to late July, June, July. Yeah, if I'm not wrong. That had been that were led by specific hashtags, which were started as Reject the Finance Bill. There was a very punitive finance bill that the government was trying to put in place. An IMF-backed, let me not go into the details of that. But the hashtag evolved from now Reject the Finance Bill to Occupy Parliament, which the demonstrators did and actually breached the parliament on the day that the bill was being voted on. To Ruto must go now. Ruto is the president. And in terms of some of these slurs that have been used, especially now for the politicians that are supporting the president agenda, we've seen offensive and derogatory slurs. I'm not sure to call them misogynistic, whereby we identify some of the politicians, such as the leader of majority in parliament, as the president's wife. Like he does everything for him. And now that comes along with imagery of trying to depict him as a woman. Yeah, something like that. And in terms of hate speech, it has also been a big issue in many countries, especially in the electoral periods, that has led to even people being turned to IDPs, internally displaced peoples, and in some cases refugees, whereby they use coded languages. For example, if a community X is the original inhabitants of, let's say, let me use Nairobi, but Nairobi is a metropolitan, but I'm just using it as an example. So community X are the traditionally original inhabitants of this place, but due to different things, you see that maybe another community Y had migrated into Nairobi and are probably prospering, and they are not an original inhabitant. So we normally find that during elections, you'll find something like in Swahili called madoadoa. Madoadoa is a spot or a freckle. So politicians are asking you to kind of eradicate these spots so that we can have a homogeneous kind of entity. Or it could also refer to people supporting a less influential political aspirant or a political party. And so another term could be weed, like weeding out, whereby maybe in a farm you see that you're trying to weed out so that your plants can grow. So they calling the other tribe or community that has moved in as Sweden. The code words now madoadoa, the sports, remove the sports, or weed out these people, usually translate to physical violence and even killings to these populations. And so in terms of that, now we normally have, especially during elections in countries that we are monitoring, we normally have a lexicon of terms. We call it a hitlex of some of the common terms that if maybe I taught you Paul or someone else here taught you Swahili. If I mention madoado or sport, you'll think I'm just speaking about some sports somewhere, but it's coded hateful language meant to attack a specific group. So we normally have a lexicon of these terms and also mapping out the politicians. So that's a list of all the aspirants and their social media platforms, and also not just the aspirants, but also peps and pips, politically influential persons and politically exposed persons, to kind of now have a better way to monitor and listen into this conversation and now try and identify cases of disinformation and hate speech. So characteristic of hate speech, we mentioned discriminatory, dehumanizing, stereotyping, generalization, targeting vulnerable population, and lack of respect for diversity. So hate speech has also been a main issue, especially targeting the LGBTQ plus community. So we had campaigns in Kenya some time back through the end of last year after was it the High Court? Yeah, the High Court gave members of an LGBTQ plus organization the freedom to associate. So saying that this freedom is protected for every citizen. So as much as you may be LGBTQ or whoever, you have a right to associate as long as you're not causing harm to anyone. And we had protests being led by some of the vocal politicians and religious organizations, mostly the Christian and Muslim leaders in the country, leading to countrywide demonstration in most of the major cities, Mombasa and Nairobi. The same now has been observed in Nigeria after the signing of the Samoa Agreement, which has now been debunked by quite a number of media organizations, saying that there wasn't any agreement on any LGBTQ plus content in that agreement. And in terms of now the effect, and that's why I mentioned about the breakout scale. So it's a scale designed to assess the impact of an influence operation. And we have a few stages. So for stage one, we look at, is it limited to an online community on a single platform? Will be now a closed Facebook group discussing local issues. The other one is stage two, spreads to category two, one platform breakout or many platforms and no breakout. Also spreads within one community but uses multiple platforms. So from a local activist group using Facebook and then Twitter to mobilize a protest. So for the Kenyan protest, which the weird thing about it is how organic, as much as there were people leading these efforts, is that they were mostly led by hashtags, which also happened in the Nigerian case. It was the end bad governance protest, and then there was hashtag 10 days of rage, anger, rage. So whereby the demonstration took place between the 1st of August to the 10th. And now it goes all the way to category 6. So category five is that it gains amplification from high-profile individuals like celebrities or politicians. Then it goes now viral. That's how I say now it has really broken out. Now we look at our strategy. So in terms of the strategy that we have, I hope this slide is visible. We do timeline analysis. So we use tools to use the tools timeline to first pick out periods for scanning periods, and then we look at specific spikes in the activity depending on now the queries that we have. Then behavioral analysis. So that's the TTP's techniques and tactics and procedures that are being used in these campaigns. The narrative analysis. So that's the common theme or key narratives being propagated, and forensic analysis. So that's an in-depth investigation to find evidence of manipulation, looking at now the behavior like account timeline, pro-Russian media, and there's an investigation that we did in collaboration on an organization called Perceptor, whereby a bot was created and it had an online persona that was running a newsroom. So I'm going to mention that shortly. And then in terms of the hate lex, which I just mentioned, so that's why we kind of collect the a lexicon of terms that could be used to propagate hate. So in the case of Kenya, we were working with the NCAC, that's the government agency that was mandated to track hate speech in the country. I probably shouldn't be saying things, but it's constitutionally mandated to prosecute these kind of acts, but it has mostly been referred to as a toothless dog, since politicians will say some of these hate speech terms and more often than not get away with it. So I digress. So we worked on them on this to try and help them monitor this kind of discussion and conversation online, and we added this to their hate lex. So and the lexicon continues to grow as we monitor the in-country analysts working on specific factors. So for the elections, we've monitored for most of the election that happens between last year and this year. So Kenya in 2022, Nigeria last year, South Africa last year, DRC last year, and we are still working on a number of few. So for the Kenyan one, and I think this data I might have used the wrong one because we've mapped more than 17,000 PIPs, political influential people. So this includes they're getting their names and their social media platforms. So this includes incumbent office bearers, new candidates, and also those who have lost their seats. We also did the same in Nigeria and in a number of countries. So the watch list we normally is applied to platforms to help them safeguard social media accounts and to monitoring teams for active lexicon and troll tracking. So in terms of this data and the hate speech terms that we find, we usually work with some of the media platforms, mostly Meta, and we're currently also working on TikTok, trying to identify cases of disinformation. And we normally give them periodic reports on new actors or networks that we identify, and some that have already been brought down. And also, fact checking arms also works on debunking some of the issues and claims that are coming up. So it's one of the independent fact checkers that helps Meta in moderation of the content. So this is also the mapping of candidates. These were the ones in the 2022 general elections, and this was in Nigeria last year's election. Then in terms of targeted monitoring, we use the three set of signals. That's mainstream media, social media listening and monitoring to track now what influencers keywords that are mentioned, and also Google Trends, which is the dominant search engine in not just Kenya but most of Africa. So we kind of we're looking at spikes of what's currently trending between different kind of periods. And as you can see on the right, on the first graph, I think data crowd tangle. Yeah. You can see that we were tracking hate speech for the term Madoadoa sports that I had just mentioned. And you can see that spike on around July 2022. And the main opposition leader, Raila Odinga, was one of the people who had mentioned, used such terms. And now from that lexicon is that then we create a search query, whereby it's a general search query just to find instances of those mentions. And from the general search query and the results that we get, we kind of now do in-depth investigation of maybe we find that this kind of posts keep popping up. So we kind of now start to focus on specific aspects of the results of the query. And in terms of some of the monitoring tools that we use, for investigating tools that we use. So we have CFA Civic Signals, so that's the media monitoring tool. And then we have Meltwater, so when normally used to monitor X. Then we have Multigo, Multigo for investigations. It's a very helpful tool to mapping out networks. Multigo and Votimo are from the same entity. We had CrowdTangle, which unfortunately has been deprecated by Meta. So we are still trying out new tools, especially since now the meta content library is still in early stages of development, and it doesn't offer half or as good as results as CrowdTangle used to provide to us. And also now, in terms of the changes that have happened to platforms like X, it's becoming much harder for researchers and maybe CSOs to kind of monitor these platforms because of now the access to the APIs and also the price points of these products. So this is the investigation, one of the collaborative investigation that we've done with Story Killers. So it's an investigation that was led by Forbidden Stories, the consortium, working undercover for 6 months to uncover this expose about the journalist called Anita Petit. So in terms of the campaign was run by an Israeli organization called Percepto that is a rebranded version of Site Group and was used to subvert for trying to subvert the 2016 US election. So it created a fake persona or a deep avatar that manages a fake media NGO. So the persona was called Anita Petit, and I think it's an interesting story whereby he has a whole profile and also some AI edited images of who she is, a French Ghanaian a journalist living in Paris, but in real sense, it was just a number of bots. And from the investigation, we found out that this Anita Petit had hired some journalists in the Sahel region, mostly Mali, Burkina Faso, to write for the publication. So what the people thought, the journalists thought that they were being hired by an actual person. They didn't know that it was a bot that was running all this, being managed by an organization. Yeah, you can see that the Perceptor International, though this was a recorded conversation, and the picture on the right now, that's the fictitious investigative reporter, Anita Petit. And now they were using this to recruit pro-Russian influencers and journalists. And this is Kemiseba, one of the leading anti-Semitic and anti-West, anti-French influencer in West Africa. So you can see that it created an online press agency, and within 6 months, it was one of the top 5 agencies in the country. So that was now one of the perceptual people bragging out to the investigators. So it had another agency, Burkina News, that had 15 to 17 full-time journalists. So Perceptor boasted it used the avatars to recruit, subvert real-world activities and social media influencers. So feeding them a narrative on what to write on. Due to time, I'm not going to really go into details of that, but it's an interesting conversation in the links provided there. And we also look at AI-generated content, especially in the election periods. So in a brief, for example, we can see that some of the top 2, this was very evident in the South African general elections, whereby there were videos, especially generated videos of people or parties claiming that they have been endorsed by influential celebrities or political figures. So one was saying that there's a video advising Tinubu, Nigerian president, on Nigeria's problems from Trump. Another one was the EFF. It's one of the opposition parties in South Africa, led by a very vocal person called Julius Malema, interesting figure. And we found this video saying that Eminem, the US rapper, had endorsed the EFF party. There's also another one, apparently, of Joe Biden endorsing the MK party, Mkhonto It's the party that former South African president who was ejected from the ANC was using to run for another term as president. And in the interest of time, I think I'll wrap it up there and hand it over back to Paul for any questions. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Moffin. Really, really interesting talk. There are loads that you've covered. Yeah, really fascinating stuff. So we do have a few questions, conscious of time, so I will try and get through them. So I'll start with a question from Malcolm. So do you get any active support from the social media companies?
Yeah, we do, especially in the case of Meta and TikTok. We normally have ongoing projects. So CFA is a nonprofit, so we normally work with funding from other organizations, could be the UN, could be the EU and such, and also the individual platforms. So for Meta, we had had a few projects in the past, helping them now with trying to identify these networks. So some of our research has contributed to I think it's the meta threat report that they normally produce every quarter. So in terms, that's one of the interventions or collaborations we have with Meta. But also TikTok, we have a project whereby we try and give them the information landscape and market overview of specific countries. So how the information what's the word I just used? Sorry about that. The information landscape maybe in we've done Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and also specific based issues whereby we scan on the discussions maybe around TikTok in Africa in issues such as Russian propaganda, such as extremism, such as LGBTQ plus activities, and we see how is there any moderation that are there any posts that are skipping some of their moderation steps or maybe their algorithms to detect this? Yeah, so that's it.
Thanks, Moffin. Next question we have from Claire. She is asking if you know of anyone doing similar work to what you're doing at Code for Africa in other places, for example, the UK, India, or the US. So are you familiar with any other organizations doing similar work?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the organization per se, but uh, I am in contact with quite a number of investigators because we normally work cross-border. So we have some working for DW in Germany. Actually, most of the leading mainstream newsrooms in now Europe and actually everywhere they have a specific investigative desk that handle this information. So I know quite a few from DW and also the FR lab. We have a project for the DFR lab. We have uh, a kind of a course called the Digital Sherlocks. It's a very interesting course that goes deep into the all this about influence operations and FIMI and tracking it all out and protecting yourself. So if she's interested in a specific country, I can try and get her contacts for some of the people working in this. I'm not sure from the top of my head about the organization, but it's something maybe if she can reach out to me by email or also on the platform, the Data Lab platform, I can be able to give a few names.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Muffin. So we are just at time there, conscious that people might need to get away. So we will post the slides and a recording of your session into the Data Lab community. As we mentioned, if anyone has any additional questions, we can answer them there. So thanks again to everyone that joined us, and particularly to Moffin. Thank you so much for your session there. And everyone enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.